What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. Today we are rating random fantasy Premier League first drafts for FPL 2020-21. Of course, I went out on Twitter and asked for some of your drafts. I got over 250 responses, which is absolutely crazy. Can't fit all of them in this video, and obviously some of them were quite similar, but I tried to pick 6 of the best to talk through today, give you my opinion, maybe some tips along the way as well into how maybe it can be improved. But obviously it's all opinion, so you don't have to take my opinion on board, but I'm going to give it anyway. Just before we jump into that, I just want to talk about today's sponsor. Really happy that OneFootball are back on the channel sponsoring today's video. They're helping me produce even more content, which I hope you're enjoying pre-season and obviously into the season to come as well. And not only that, but on the last video I did with them, a few people messaged me to say they downloaded the app and they were really happy with it. So that's really good to hear. I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't used the app and been happy with it myself. If you want to try it out, the great thing is it's completely free. Just click that link in the description below. That will really help me out. Take you straight through to the Android store, take you straight through to the iOS store. Whichever device you use, you can download it and give it a go. It's a great football app. It's just what FPL managers need. Pre-season, you get all your transfer talk, team news and stuff like that. And obviously throughout the season, you get your goal notifications at the weekend. Hopefully your FPL players have scored and all your stats and team news continued as well right throughout the season. So click that link in the description below. Let me know what you think and let's get on with the video. So FoxTech up first with a very interesting draft for one reason and one reason only. There are no Liverpool players in it at all. It'll be interesting to see whether you go for that when Gameweek 1 comes around the corner. 3-5-2, absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think 3-5-2, 4 at the back, 3-4-3, whatever you want to do is obviously fine. And I'm not trying to sit here to influence people into how they want to pick their teams. Absolutely not. But I am going to give my opinion. And it's not always going to be trying to revert people back to my team, but also just kind of give an opinion and kind of think out loud about reasons why you might want to maybe consider changing something. Not have to change it, but maybe consider it. So there's no talk here of wildcarding early. In fact, I think he told me that he didn't want a wildcard early. The concerns are, of course, no Liverpool players. Doherty, Aubameyang, Son, Kane and Werner are all locks in the team. So once you consider those players, they're so expensive, very difficult to fit in Liverpool players anyway. Here's the reason why I am not keen on not going with Salah. And again, you don't have to listen to this, you don't have to take this advice on board, but here's why. I think from game week 1 to 10, you could captain Salah quite a lot. More than you'd probably want to captain Aubameyang. Now, obviously, Aubameyang for Fulham away and West Ham at home looks really good. And we know that in game weeks 2 and 3, Salah plays Chelsea and Arsenal. But in game week 1, Salah has Leeds. Now, I know a lot of people think Leeds are going to do well, and probably defensively they will be better than Fulham. But that is a home fixture for Liverpool, a home fixture for Salah, which is incredible. Most of the time, any time Salah's playing at home versus nearly any team in the league that's not maybe a Man United, a Chelsea, or even a Man City, that's a good fixture. So a newly promoted side, whether it's Leeds or not, that's a good fixture at home. So in my opinion, Salah at home to Leeds or Aubameyang versus Fulham away, there's not too much difference in that for me. I think Salah is fine. So obviously game week 2 is better because Aubameyang has West Ham at home. But after that, Arsenal's fixtures get really tricky. Whereas I think after game week 3, Salah's fixtures are actually okay, and there's quite a few times you'd want to captain him. And if you're not thinking about wildcarding early, then straight away, potentially, you've locked yourself into a move to maybe get him, maybe get a Man City player, maybe get a Man United player. And that's without considering there might be other players that come to the fore that are suddenly options. Like we saw last year, who was thinking about Pukki before game week 1? No one. Suddenly people wanted him in. Now, don't get me wrong. He was a cheap price. It was easy to get him in. And to be fair, one thing I'll say about this draft is there's a load of different players you could bring in. You've got Kane, the most expensive forward. You can move to any other forward really easily. No money in the bank, I assume, but you only need 0.5 million to go from Son to Rashford. Ziyech could be Greenwood. Aubameyang could be Salah, De Bruyne or Sterling. So you have got options in this team. So I certainly don't hate it, but that's why I wouldn't want to go with Salah. Like, if I'm choosing one of Aubameyang or Salah for my game week 1 team, I'm probably going to go about Aubameyang. When you see my first, not my first draft, my updated draft on Thursday, you'll see exactly what I mean. And obviously in defence, no Trent Alexander-Arnold. I think for a lot of people, he's the first name on the list. He's just devastating on his day, and he can get clean sheets and attacking returns out of nowhere. So I don't like going without him at all. But obviously, in the defence, you've got Doherty. I think it's a great option. I think Tierney's good, but the same problem with Aubameyang. He's good for the first 2 fixtures. How good is he after that? And again, are you locking yourself into another transfer? That's all I would be thinking about. Aurier, I mean, there's lots of speculation that he might leave. 5.5 million are the better options at that price, potentially. Ben Chilwell's probably going to be injured for the start of the season, but he looks like he's going to move to Chelsea. And if Chelsea get a new goalkeeper, they look extremely exciting. I'd maybe look at him instead. You could go to Dyer for 0.5 million less. You could maybe go for Luke Shaw if he's fit to start the season, 0.5 million less. I don't hate Aurier. I think Spurs' fixtures are really, really good. But obviously, if he's leaving, or potentially going to leave, they're not necessarily an option. So consider that. I think in midfield, Ziyech is the one I'm probably least kind of excited about in that Chelsea team. I think I prefer Werner, which you've got anyway, and I prefer Pulisic when he's fit. Now, at the time of the recording this, there's huge speculation that Havertz is about to sign for Chelsea, and everyone thinks that Abraham isn't going to play anymore. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. When people were talking about Werner pre-season, before he came to Chelsea, everyone kept telling me he's not a traditional number 9 necessarily. He can play off the left of a striker. So if he does that at Chelsea, who's playing as the number 9? You'd assume Abraham or Giroud. In which case, who's playing on the right? Pulisic? Where's Havertz playing? Where does Mount fit in? Where does Ziyech fit in? You've got to think there's going to be some kind of rotation. So at the moment, not only do I think Ziyech is probably the worst option out of the three, Werner, him and Pulisic. Obviously, that's probably why he's priced where he is. Also, I just don't know what that Chelsea kind of lineup is going to be. I'm very excited about it. They have signed some world-class players and they scored enough goals last year. I think they'll step it up a gear this year. But Ziyech, I don't know, there's just something about him. But like I said, you've got an easy move there to go to Greenwood. So it's not the end of the world. You have got a move where you can do that. Otherwise, I can't really fault the team. Like, Kane ended the season really well. Son didn't look as good, I didn't think, in the team with Kane at the end of last season, but I still think he was a bit unlucky not to score more. He's currently in my draft. I wouldn't write him off for sure. Otherwise, I quite like it. I think Armstrong might be an issue. We don't know how those £5.5 million midfielders are going to play. And obviously, when you try and get from him to someone else, you've probably either got to use 2 transfers or just get some money from somewhere. So that might be an issue. But overall, I like the team. It's ballsy to go without Liverpool. I've told you why I like Salah instead of Aubameyang. Let's see what you do for game week 1. So Seb up next with the more traditional 3-4-3. And this kind of shows you what you can do when you don't spend a huge amount of money at the back. So a lot of people may be looking to go for Trent plus one of Robertson or Van Dijk, or maybe a Doherty or someone like that, or a couple of 5.5, 6 million defenders elsewhere. And obviously in this draft, the most expensive defender after Trent is 4.5 million, Justin Vinagre in Dallas as well. But that means you can have Salah and Aubameyang and Werner and still have a really good striker in Jimenez as well. Now, the downside for anyone that's thinking of doing this is, of course, if you need to upgrade in those defenders, because outside of the 4.5s on this list, there are a few others, like Taylor, for example. You've got Lamptey at Brighton as well. So there are options, but you don't necessarily want to lock yourself into not being able to upgrade. Maybe you need to go up to a 5 million, a Bellerin, a Shaw, maybe a Dyer or someone like that. Go up to 5.5, maybe bring in a Doherty, whatever it might be. You got to try and figure out how would you get the money to do that if you wanted to do it. If you're really happy with the attack, then don't bother upgrading. But that's just one thing to think about for anyone in this situation. McCarthy at the back, I think he's probably the best 4.5 million goalkeeper as it stands. He's probably the one that I will go for if I don't spend money elsewhere. You could go for Ramsdale if you've got 0.5 million extra. And obviously Vinagre, we talked about him a lot. If they sign a left back, then I'd be worried about having him. But that, for right now, that's not a huge concern. Now, obviously, to fund this, you need some cheaper players. So another £5.5 million midfielder. They're quite popular in a lot of the drafts that I've seen. I don't think any of them are massively standout. Like Saka would have to wait and see if he plays the Community Shield. St Max has got okay fixtures, and so does Armstrong for Southampton as well. I think St Max and Armstrong are probably the two favourites unless Saka starts that Community Shield. Obviously, Lundstram not an issue since he's not a defender anymore. So I quite like this. I think Jimenez has probably been overlooked quite a lot so far, including by me. Wolves fixtures, like I said, are really, really good for the opening 6. And at 8.5 million, he scored nearly 200 points last year. And why can he not do that again? No Europe for Wolves either, which I think will probably help them out. And he's about as nailed as it comes. Sometimes takes penalties as well. So I really like Jimenez. Mitrovic, again, around that £6 million price point, if that's all you got to spend, there's very little on offer. I quite like Che Adams, potentially, if he gets minutes. If you look at his stats post-lockdown versus Ings, he was pretty good in comparison, but he doesn't always get the minutes, and they've got Shane Long there as well. So if in pre-season, if Southampton play many matches and Che Adams is starting, then perhaps I think about getting him. But otherwise, for 6 million, Mitrovic is probably the way to go. If you think that Ziyech is not necessarily guaranteed to start, we'll have to try and get some kind of indication from Lampard and Chelsea pre-season. He could maybe be downgraded, which would let you upgrade St Max or Mitrovic or one of the defenders as well. So that's probably the key area I think money could be made in this team. But I like the Aubameyang and Salah starting combination. I think that gives you an out to go to a Man City midfielder or a Man United midfielder in game week 2 or 3. And obviously you can just keep the other one. Maybe it's Salah, maybe it's Aubameyang, whichever one you think is best. So Jack up next, outwork the space. There's 2 reasons I picked this draft. One, the image was nicely cropped. I didn't have to change anything to put it in to the video. There you go, there's a little insight into my thought process when choosing which ones to include. But also, a player that I've not seen in any draft, I don't think, Iheanacho up front. Let's talk about the rest first. 3-4-3, Ramsdale in goal, so not a 4.5 million keeper. I quite like that. I think Sheffield United's opening kind of 4 or 5 fixtures are quite good. And obviously, if they perform like they did last year, he's going to be a bargain at 5 million. You could go for McCarthy at 4.5. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if you've got that 0.5 million to spend, it could be worth it. Of course, if you're thinking ahead and maybe thinking, could I use that 0.5 million later? It could be safer to maybe go for a 4.5 million goalkeeper now and have that money in the bank. But there's not a huge issue there. I think Ramsdale's a great option. This is a 3-4-3 with Trent and Doherty at the back, so I quite like that. Obviously, Vinagre is going to depend on whether Wolves sign a new left back. If he doesn't, absolutely gold. Wolves' fixtures are so good. Double up in defence, absolutely no issues with that. And that's probably where I'm leaning if they don't sign a new left-back, and obviously Trent in there as well. Set Max in there again. Obviously, you need someone in there when you've got players like Salah, Aubameyang, Son, and Werner up front. And one thing I haven't seen a huge amount of conversation around is the Leicester fixtures. They're so good. Some of us are looking at Jamie Vardy, but of course there's other options. Harvey Barnes, James Maddison in midfield. One player I've not seen in any drafts, I don't think at least, is Iheanacho, 6 million. Now, the back end of last season, Leicester were playing quite often with 2 up front, so Vardy and Iheanacho. Some of that was down to injuries, though. They had quite a few defensive injuries. Ricardo and Ben Chilwell weren't there to kind of play in their normal 4 at the back formation, so they kind of went more to a 3 at the back formation. James Maddison wasn't fit either. If everyone's fit to start the season, I know Johnny Evans is suspended at the start, but if everyone's fit, and they might be selling Chilwell, of course, I don't 100% know. I wouldn't be 100% confident if Iheanacho would play. What I will say on the flip side of that, when he did play last year, his underlying stats are really, really good. And Leicester's fixtures are decent too, especially a first game against West Brom. So if we get any indication from pre-season that he is going to play, now I do like him as an option at 6 million. Who else you got? Mitrovic, who's already in the team. Che Adams as well, who's going to depend a lot on starts. I quite like him. I've already kind of talked about Werner as well. I think he's a really decent option for 9.5 million. So overall, I quite like the team. I don't think there's been a huge amount of sacrifices made. Obviously, without having McCarthy in goal, it lets you have Walker Peters as a 4.5 million defender. I think he's one of the best options. And as long as Wolves don't sign a left back, you're probably safe with Vinagre as well. So not too many concerns. There's not a huge amount, like I said, of sacrifices where you're stuck with players that you maybe don't want. You've only got to move on like one of set max to another 5.5 or whoever it might be. And of course, you can make 2 transfers at a time. Maybe you want to downgrade Son to like a Harvey Barnes or a Grealish, whoever it might be. That saves you 2 million. Then actually put Set Maxim into someone like Greenwood instead. So I really like this team. Iheanacho is a bit of a punt though. If there's no indication that he's going to start, I really don't like that. I think you'd have to swap him out. But if he does start, the fixtures are so good. His underlying stats were decent too. Could be a great option. Okay, so this team's a little bit different, which is one of the reasons I selected it. So 4-4-2 on paper, but obviously if you look at the bench, that's where it's a little bit different. Some forward planning for Man United players. Now, I'm going to talk about this point more generally rather than about this team for a second, because a few people have asked me, should I have Man United players on the bench or should I get them in game week 2? Maybe use a transfer to bring them in, whatever it might be. My preference, I think, is if you're dead set on having Man United players in game week 2, I would probably put them on your bench. The reason for that is, it's all well and good booking transfers ahead, and you should plan ahead. I said that on a video recently, but at the start of the season especially, there's all of a sudden a player that you've not considered that's in banging form. Maybe he's knocked in a hat-trick in game week 1, a hat-trick in game week 2. Like Pukki last year. I made a triple transfer, I think, in game week 2 or 3 last year to get Pukki, Mount and De Bruyne. 3 players I hadn't put in my game week 1 side that I suddenly decided that I needed. And they did really well for me, at least for a few weeks. So it was a good move. If that happens again, well, suddenly you've also got to try and fit in your transfers for your Man City players, your transfers for your Man United players as well. And suddenly you can get a bit lost. It's hits, it's wild cards early when maybe you don't want to. If you do, of course, that's different. But for some people, they're not going to want to. So I would consider, if you want Man United players, putting them in your squad from the start. So that's what's done here. Now, from what I can see from this team, it's going to be a 4-3-3, I think, most weeks. So Trent Alexander-Arnold, Dyer, Doherty, Lindelof are your 4 at the back. Aubameyang and Son, of course. And then one of the other 3 midfielders, Souček, Ward-Prowse or Trezeguet, and then Martial, Mitrovic and Kane up front. The one thing I would consider with this team, is how much of the money is spread around in that midfield. So Souček, Ward-Prowse, Trezeguet. It's great having a bit of rotation, picking the one that you think's best week in, week out. My personal preference would be to drop 2 of them, maybe even keep Souček at 5, but drop one of the others to a 4.5 million midfielder who you're not going to play most weeks, and upgrade maybe Trezeguet to like a 6.5, a 7 million pound midfielder. Of course, if you're really happy with Trezeguet, then fine. If he's going to keep getting enough minutes, then that's great. If not, you could put that money elsewhere. Maybe a Maddison or a Harvey Barnes or someone like that in midfield. Spend that extra money there and have cheaper positions on your bench. The more you spread around the money in your team for Game Week 1, the harder it is to get that money into other positions. So what I would say here is, if you want to go for like a Pulisic or a Ziyech or whoever it might be in midfield, how are you going to fund that with this team? So I don't think there's any money in the bank. You'd have to start making double or triple transfers to get the money out of positions to put it elsewhere. So that's something I would consider. The other thing is as well, like, again, I'm not going to sit here telling you should or shouldn't get certain players, but from what I know of Leeds, which isn't a huge amount, but I've done a video on Scout for them if you want to go and check that out, and talked about them there. I don't think Struijk is nailed by any stretch of the imagination for that Leeds team. Now, Ben White might not sign. It sounds like it's going to be Cooper at centre-back and Ben White or a new player there, and obviously Eiling and maybe Dallas left back and right back. So I don't see where Struijk fits in, and maybe I've got that wrong. If Leeds fans have got a different opinion, let me know in the comments below. But that's something I think about. Maybe go for a different 4.5 million defender, maybe James Justin or someone like that to play in Game Week 1. But overall, a fairly solid side. Obviously, the preference is there. If you think that Son and Kane are great for Spurs opening fixtures, that's decent. But you've got no Man City, no Liverpool apart from Trent, so no Liverpool attack. And obviously no Chelsea as well, who are looking quite exciting. So something to think about. Maybe consider taking some of that value out of those midfielders and putting it elsewhere instead. The one captain has put in a team as well. Nicely cropped as well, this one. 3-5-2, a little bit different to other 3-5-2s I've looked at. Most of them have gone for like a Centre-Max or an Armstrong, whoever it might be, to be able to use the money elsewhere. This was a little bit different, a bit less money up front. And to be fair, when FPL started leaking prices, when it started launching, everyone said they were going to go 3-5-2, cheap players up front. But obviously then Werner turned up and everyone wanted him as well. Jimenez is the most expensive striker in this team. Obviously Davis is on the bench. Davis, by the way, is really highly owned. There's absolutely no guarantee that he plays week in, week out for Aston Villa. It doesn't necessarily matter. You can have non-playing players on your bench. I don't really have an issue with that. I probably will do that myself this year. But just one thing to kind of think about for anyone that's considering having him. But obviously, again, I've already spoken about Mitrovic and I've already spoken about Jimenez. I don't think there's any issues doing that if you want to pump money in the midfield. Obviously, this one's gone. This team's gone for kind of a cheap defence. Again, loads of 4.5 millions. No issue with that either. But again, like I said earlier in the video, make sure you've got a plan if you do need to upgrade one of those defenders. Robertson instead of Trent Alexander-Arnold is really interesting. I think when lockdown happened, or after lockdown, Robertson was really poor for the opening few games. It seemed like it took him a long time, or a little bit of time, to get up to scratch. But when he did, he was really good. Arguably a little bit more attacking than Trent Alexander-Arnold, at least towards the back end of the season. The one thing I would say, though, over the course of the season, Trent absolutely smashed it. 5.5 points per game, I think it was for him, and Robertson was around 5. And it was the same the year before. Trent Alexander-Arnold, points per match. He didn't play as many minutes as Robertson the season before, but his points per match were better. And I just don't see why that will be different this year. So obviously, there's a 0.5 million expense there. You have to pay 0.5 million more to get Trent. But it might be something to consider. Otherwise, no major issues with the team. I like the midfield. It gives you flexibility to move around those players. Up front, it's interesting. You've got Kane, you've got Aguero. You have to kind of not decide right now if you want those players in. But obviously, if you're thinking about maybe going to a higher price striker, it's easier to get them in now and then move them around. So for those drafts that had Kane in, you can go for any other forward that you want in the whole of FPL, because no forward is more expensive than 10.5. So that's something to consider. But what I would say about that, for anyone considering going 3-5-2, it does only take 2 moves to put that money into the attack. So if this example, you've got Son at 9 million. Let's say you wanted Martial instead of Rashford. You could just swap Son and Davis to a 4.5 million midfielder and Martial up front. And then suddenly you've got your striker there as well. And you've moved into a 3-4-3. So using 2 transfers is not ideal. I think preferably if you've got a 3-5-2, you should almost have a plan that that's going to be your team for a few weeks. But push comes to shove, you can move into 3-4-3 or 4-4-2 or whatever it might be. You've got that kind of flexibility. Maddison's an interesting one because he was injured for so much of the back end of last season. Maybe we just don't really know how he's going to perform. And last year, I had him for a little bit and he was great, but then he really went off the boil and there was like 9 or 10 games in a row where he just didn't get any attacking returns. Personally, for the same price, If he's going to start, I prefer Harvey Barnes. His numbers are slightly better. You're more likely to get you a goal. Obviously, Maddison has set pieces, which is nice. But the likes of Evans, who are strong in the air from corners, are suspended for the first 3 games. So something else to consider. So try and get a look in on pre-season and maybe consider Harvey Barnes instead. I think from a goal threat point of view, especially from open play, he is better than Maddison, but obviously Maddison is a bit of an assister, so a decent option. Son probably being overlooked a little bit because of that 9 million price point. It's a little bit tricky to work in, but I do like it here. And you've got Aubameyang and Salah, so you've got massive flexibility for getting in Man United, Man City players if you want. The likes of Rashford for 9.5, for example, I think he's a really good option. People are going to struggle to bring him in. I've already given my opinions on Ziyech, so I won't say it again. But ultimately, if you think he's going to do well and you think Chelsea's going to do well, then this team looks solid. I think Taylor's a great option at the back. Justin for a few weeks at least. Maybe when Ricardo's back, James Justin might lose his place. Obviously, they look like they're going to sell Chilwell. So whether Thomas comes in there or maybe Justin moves over to left back, I don't know. But that's one thing to monitor. But a really nice team. Jimenez and Mitrovic up front look good, and I really like the midfield. That's probably one of the strongest 3-5-2 midfield I think I've seen so far. So that's all the drafts I'm going to go through today. Thanks to everyone that sent me one over. I know I couldn't use all of them, but I do appreciate those of you that sent me one on Twitter to be able to use in this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up. I don't usually do more than one of these videos in pre-season, but if we get enough likes, let's say 4,000 or 5,000 likes in the next 7 days, if they're that popular, if you want another one that much, I'll do a part 2. So give me a thumbs up on this video if you enjoyed it, and we'll consider doing a part 2. Obviously, subscribe if you're new around here as well. Loads of content to come. I know 50% of you that are watching this will not be subscribed. You're hitting my content on the home screen. You might as well subscribe as well. Hit that notification bell. If you haven't tried OneFootball out, there's a link in the description below. You can go through, try it out for free on Android or iOS. Again, send me a message, let me know what you think. And lastly, if you want a bit of extra content, if you want to support the channel even more, there's a Patreon link in the description below. There's content already up there for pre-season. Again, that'll be throughout the season as well. Make sure to check that out. Let me know what you think, and I will catch you tomorrow for yet another FPL video. Thanks very much for watching.